what's going on, everybody? It's your boy HP, and you're listening to the Unsportsmanlike Conduct podcast, a podcast for the average Joe that covers football, my beloved New York Giants, some baseball and basketball from time to time, and any other current events impacting our sports world. Before I get into the agenda for today, everyone please follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. I'm also on Twitter now, so please follow me on Twitter. That's _unsportsman. And lastly, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube page. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get this show started. So the agenda for today, guys, I'm going to talk about a couple of topics. I'm going to talk about my expectations for second-year head coach for the New York Giants, Pat Shurmur. My expectations for second-year defensive coordinator, James Bettcher. There's been some new movement around the team. The team looks different. There have been new pieces. Some pieces have left. I'm going to talk about all of my expectations on today's podcast. Also, running backs today have changed NFL offenses. The expectation for running backs is to not only be good rushers, but also be good receivers, not only out of the backfield, but also be able to line up as slot receivers. I'm going to talk about it all on today's podcast. Let's get this show started. So, as a rookie head coach, as a first-year head coach for the New York Giants, Pat Shurmur led the New York Giants to a 5-11 season. That was only 2-game improvement from the year prior where we were 3-13. In both years, we ended up with the top 10 lottery pick. So there wasn't that much of a difference from a winning standpoint. I think teams expected us to score a lot more points with Pat Shurmur as our head coach, given what he had did previously with the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, if you really think about it, Pat Shurmur did such a great job with the Minnesota Vikings and Case Keenum that Case Keenum ended up being a hot commodity. And teams wanted him, teams were willing to trade for him, teams were willing to pay him big money. And look, Case Keenum isn't that good of a quarterback, but Pat Shurmur made him look like it. Pat Shurmur designed a pretty good offense. They put together a pretty good offensive line there, and their running game was designed very well too. Pat Shurmur did some really good things for that Minnesota Vikings offense, which was why they were able to go to the NFC Championship. And so he became one of the hottest coaching candidates in that offseason, and the New York Giants grabbed him as our head coach. And I think for the most part, he did a decent job for the New York Giants last year. I know our offense started pretty slowly last year, but he was a first-time head coach. This wasn't the first. This is the first time Pat Shurmur was a head coach for an NFL team. He had new weapons to look at. He had a new quarterback. There was an offensive line that wasn't as complete as that Minnesota Vikings offensive line was. So there's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, a new structure to come into and sort of rebuild. Technically, even though the Giants had some competitive pieces, with the new general manager and Dave Gettleman, the team was clearly going into a direction where they weren't going to keep a lot of those pieces. So because of all those moving parts, I gave Pat Shurmur a pass for last year's 5-11 season. Because what I did notice is, in the second half of last year, after our first 8 games, we started to score more points. We were averaging, between 20 and 30 points a game. And then if you look at the last 4 games that for the New York Giants last year, after OBJ was out, so OBJ was injured the last 4 games of the 2018 season last year. We faced the Redskins. We ended up scoring 40 points against the Washington Redskins, who have a really good defense. The only outlier is that the Tennessee Titans game, we got shut out. We had 0 points there. But the next week, we scored 27 points against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts were firing on all cylinders at that point. They were one of the hottest teams in the NFL, and we scored 27 points against that team. And then lastly, against the Dallas Cowboys, we scored 35 points. So Pat Shurmur has shown that once he got into the groove, once he was able to completely understand the tools of this offense, and again, this was without Beckham in the lineup, he knew how to generate points and generate yards. And so that's why I believe that this year, a lot of that's going to change. I think out of the gate, our team will be a little bit more better than we have been in the last couple of years. Because if you think about it, in the last couple of years, our team, the New York Giants, always start off slow in games. Our defense usually keeps us in the games, but we're not able to drive the ball down the field. We're not able to score enough points. Now, don't get me wrong. I think our team's still going to have trouble scoring some points, but I don't think we're going to be having these cold starts that we were so used to having in the last couple of years. one more year with this is his second offseason with Eli Manning. The offensive line is finally complete. It's another offseason with Sterling Shepard, another offseason with Evan Ingram, and another offseason with one of the best running backs in the game in Saquon Barkley. And you know what? Believe it or not, whatever you want to think about Odell Beckham Jr. and his character, while I don't think Odell Beckham Jr. was a cancer to the team, I do believe he was a distraction to the team. Because I remember when Pat Shurmur got hired, one of the first questions he got asked was about Odell Beckham. Every other interview was about Odell Beckham. What's your relationship like with OBJ? Those weren't questions that a new head coach, especially with New York media, should have to answer. It was almost as if the coaching staff every week, week in and week out, had to answer questions on behalf of OBJ's sort of behavior, whether it's on or off the field, with respects to his sort of, his commitment to the New York Giants, or his, on-field antics, or his pouting and his sort of complaining about not getting the ball, or his body language. This is the first offseason where no one cares about OBJ anymore, because OBJ is not on the team. Pat Shurmur has a more clear mind coming in, and expectations, I think, overall from the media aren't as high this year. Because you know what? I think this is the first year in a very long time that the New York Giants really aren't expected to win any more than maybe 8 games. There are some teams, there's some, analysts and predictions out there. I've seen it all over social media, have the New York Giants winning maybe 3, 4, 5 games again. But I think people need to remember Pat Shurmur does know how to create an offense. He does know how to build an offense. If he can do that with Case Keenum and the Minnesota Vikings, I think he can do that with this Giants team. And I've been hearing a lot of good things out of training camp from our offense. Sterling Shepard, folks, from what I'm hearing about Sterling Shepard, I'm hearing and also seeing from the tape, he looks unguardable. He's having a crazy training camp right now. Well, not training camp, but he's having crazy mini camp right now. Darius Slayton, the rookie that we drafted, I believe, out of Auburn. He's one of our burner receivers, and while he hasn't had the same 40 time as Deshaun Jackson, I think he can serve as our Deshaun Jackson. Definitely find him in some of our 4 wide receiver sets. He'll definitely get some snaps this year. I think Pat Shurmur has a fresh mind heading into the season. I think he's going to do some pretty decent things with our offense. Now, look, I don't want to step back from what I've said a couple episodes ago. A couple episodes ago, I did an NFC East ranking and had the New York Giants ranked last. And I talked about how I think our offense will have some trouble moving the ball down the field and scoring up a lot of points. I still believe that that's going to be a issue. I think that's going to be a common theme. I think we'll still have some frequent 3-and-outs. But I think, that small sample size from the end of last year is a good sign for me heading into this year that maybe I could be wrong. Maybe our offense does get going. And so I want to get into my expectations now for Pat Shurmur, his second year as head coach. Look, this is New York. This New York Giants team is clearly showing that, yes, we are rebuilding, but we want to remain competitive at the same time. Look, Pat Shurmur, I don't expect you to help us make it to the playoffs this year. That would be very unreasonable of me. But you know what? We need to win at least 7 to 8 games. Show a legitimate improvement. Show that you actually have an input and an imprint on the rebuild of this New York Giants team. If we have a similar record this year than we did the last year or the year prior, then it's showing that, there's clearly something going on with our coaching. Because I don't think we have a terrible roster. I don't think Golden Tate is a bad receiver. I don't think Sterling Shepard is. I don't think Evan Ingram is. Those 3 receivers are good receivers. I mean, granted, Evan Ingram is a tight end, but those are 3 good, legitimate receiving options. How many teams can say they have 3 receiving options? I mean, if you think about it, those are the 3 type of receiving options that Pat Shurmur needs for his style of offense. He coaches a West Coast style offense, a power spread offense. These types of offenses use 3 wide receiver sets. We have that. We'll have Golden Tate. We'll have Sterling Shepard. Obviously, Evan Ingram, again, is a tight end. But we can throw in Corey Coleman. We can throw in Darius Slayton. We have the offense Right now, we have pieces to that fit Pat Shurmur's scheme. I honestly don't think there's an excuse for Pat Shurmur this year to not be able to have this team score points and move the ball down the field. And you know what? I think it's going to take some time throughout the game to actually score points because we don't have a legitimate wide receiver threat. But you know what? The New England Patriots almost never have a legitimate wide receiver threat. A couple of years ago, they had Brandon Cooks. Only really held on to him for, a year? And then after that, they held on to Josh Gordon? But the only reason why they held on to Josh Gordon is because he's probably a cheap contract. It doesn't even matter whether he's on the team or not, whether he shows up to camp or not. Because they know they're still going to be competitive whether he's there or not. He's an addition to that team. He's a token for that team. But you know what? They don't need Josh Gordon. The Patriots have notoriously been a team that wins time of possession and gradually gets first downs. The New York Giants have the personnel to achieve and accomplish the same type of game. To win time of possession, to win the clock, and gradually get first downs. But they have to do one thing. Pat Shurmur has to make sure he accomplishes one thing this year that he failed to do last year. Become less predictable. Too many times, it was easy to game plan for the New York Giants because everyone knew the ball was going to Saquon Barkley, whether it was in a run play, a pass play out of the backfield, or when Saquon lined up as a receiver. Pat Shurmur, you have to get creative when it comes to Saquon Barkley. Yes, we want Saquon Barkley to get his touches, but make sure he gets his touches in a creative way. Also, another thing that Pat Shurmur failed to do earlier on last year, which was why Saquon Barkley sort of struggled from a rushing standpoint. He wasn't always getting his groove right away. Is because Saquon Barkley was barely getting over 15 touches. Saquon Barkley is a healthy-looking running back. He's a young running back. He has to get between 20 to 25 carries. Not 15 carries and then 10 receptions. He has to get between 20 to 25 carries. If Saquon Barkley gets going and he gets his groove going, gets his legs and feet under him, he's going to be even more unstoppable. And now we have the capability to give Barkley that many more carries because our offensive line is finally complete. So that is my recipe for this offense. It starts with the creativity for Saquon Barkley, and that's what's going to open up everything else for Golden Tate, for Sterling Shepard, and Evan Ingram. Because that's what's going to allow us to gradually move the ball down the field, get these first downs, burn time off the clock, and then we can throw one of these receivers in for a deep play. And I mentioned how I've watched some of the tape from camp for Sterling Shepard. They've shown Sterling Shepard run deep routes. So you know what? Don't be surprised if Sterling Shepard is utilized on deep post routes or corner routes. Because I think Sterling Shepard is showing this year that he has the capability to be that deep threat. So even in those cases where we're gradually going down the field, now we can finally go for that big play because we've been so creative throughout that drive with Saquon, with Golden Tate, with Shepard. Shurmur, you have to get creative with Saquon. That's where this starts. If you run the same type of offense, the same type of play calling as last year, this offense is going to do the same thing. It's going to start off cold. It's going to be predictable and easy to defend. But lastly, again, and I want to conclude on Pat Shurmur before I head into the defensive side and go into James Bettcher, this team has to average 25 points a game. And for me to see a legitimate improvement, I want to see 7 to 8 wins. Anything over 7 to 8 wins is a premium for me. And I'll be definitely appreciative of that. But 7 to 8 wins is my expectation, and they have to meet that expectation for me to clearly see that the New York Giants are both in a rebuild and in a competitive state. And now I want to talk about James Bettcher. You know, James Bettcher last year was a first-year defensive coordinator for the New York Giants. Before that, he was a defensive coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals, and you know what? He's coached some pretty creative 3-4 hybrid defenses with the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, that Arizona Cardinals team was pretty much a turnover machine. They not only knew how to get turnovers from an interception and forced fumble standpoint, but James Bettcher was very creative in designing blitzes. I mean, he was almost a mastermind in designing very schematic and creative blitzes. Right, it wasn't always so heavily reliant on the defensive line, but he also was able to bring in safeties in the box, DBs in the box, have his outside linebackers come in and get some sacks. He was able to generate sacks very creatively. And you know what? The Arizona Cardinals didn't always have a stacked defense, but his scheme worked. And so he brings that same scheme along. Also, as a lot of New York Giants fans know, we've signed also a lot of former Arizona Cardinal players. But for some reason last year, we were the 24th ranked defense. We did get some turnovers. We did generate some turnovers in the second half of the season last year, which was a good sign. But we were the 24th ranked defense last year. We gave up a lot of yards. I think the defense took a hit when we traded Snacks Harrison because our defense became much more easier to run against up the middle. I think there's still some question marks on our middle linebacker, and solidifying that position. Because for some reason, James Bettcher does not play B.J. Goodson, and that's where I want to start off. James Bettcher, you have to play B.J. Goodson. I know, I think a lot of the coaching staff is hesitant and doesn't think B.J. Goodson is an all-down linebacker. I truly believe he is. He's always there to make every single play when he's on the field. You have to let him play, even if he's a liability in pass coverage. Linebackers are supposed to be liabilities in pass coverage. If you're so scared on pass down, then run nickel packages. We have enough DBs now, which I'll get into in a bit. You have to play B.J. Goodson a lot of snaps. Another linebacker that we have to have a lot of snaps, who I think is going to have a great and tremendous year if he does get enough snaps, is Lorenzo Carter. I have no idea why Lorenzo Carter did not play enough snaps last year. He was a rookie linebacker last year, but every time he played, he was effective. And he was always effective in the most crucial times, especially when opposing offenses were driving the ball down the field. Lorenzo Carter was most effective. That's when Lorenzo Carter got most of his sacks and some of his interceptions as well. And also most of his actually no, I don't think Lorenzo Carter had interceptions, but he had most of his sacks and most of his tackles when the offenses were driving the ball down the field, especially on our own territory. You have to play Lorenzo Carter more. You play those two linebackers enough snaps with Alec Ogletree, I think we have a pretty good core of linebackers. I think we're set to have a pretty good defense this year. Now, again, I'm very critical of the Giants not, signing or drafting a premier pass rusher. So Betcher, again, is going to have to try to find ways to creatively get sacks, but I think we can with these linebackers. I think Lorenzo Carter will help us do that. I think B.J. Hill was coming off a pretty good rookie year. I think he had about 7 sacks. Expecting to have a similar type of year, if not even better. Expect Dalvin Tomlinson to, clog up that interior. Expect Dexter Lawrence to clog up that interior. We finally replaced Snacks Harrison. Granted, I was critical of that pick because while I like Dexter Lawrence, I didn't think that was the right pick for that moment. But you know what? Dexter Lawrence is going to fill in that void of last year when we lost Snacks Harrison. And then the most important thing, one of my favorite things in this offseason that we did, which is what's going to allow James Bettcher to build a creative 3-4 hybrid defense, and I hope he runs a shit ton of nickel packages, is based off of the 2 DBs that we drafted this offseason, DeAndre Baker, a cornerback out of Georgia, and Julian Love, cornerback out of Notre Dame. You run those 2 cornerbacks with Jabril Peppers, Jack Rabbit, and Antoine Bethea, our team's going to be pretty hard to pass against. We have to be better than a 24 ranked team because you know what? Our defense has improved. Again, our weakness is still pass rusher, but our defense has improved. We've stacked up our defensive line, and we brought youth to our secondary. And again, I've said this before. This is going to be the issue with the New York Giants defense this year because we won't be able to get pass rush to the quarterback organically with our defensive line. It's going to put a lot of pressure on our young DBs to make plays. I think, Jabril Peppers, this is his first year where he's going to be the lead safety of that team, getting, almost majority of all those snaps. And then with those 2 young DBs, and then Janoris Jenkins is obviously a year older, but he's also having a good camp. There's going to be a lot of pressure on our DBs to make plays because I think quarterbacks are going to have more time to throw the ball against us because we're going to be struggling again this year to get to the quarterback. But because of that, I think our team's going to be and has the capability of being one of those defenses where it's a bend, don't break defense. Where we give up yards gradually, we'll give up first downs, they'll drive on us, but because our secondary is still talented enough, we can make stops at the right time, at the right moment, to force teams to go for field goals instead of scoring touchdowns against us. So do I think that we'll probably give up yards? Yeah, probably. But I think from a scoring standpoint, we'll give up less points, and we might even create more turnovers. And I think from a running standpoint, our rush defense will definitely improve because we've clogged up that interior. And again, James Bettcher has to follow these concepts. Play Lorenzo Carter more. Play B.J. Goodson more. Play them as all-down linebackers. Don't be selective on the way you play them. Don't be hesitant on letting them just pin their ears back. Don't be hesitant on letting them get exposed. Let them get these snaps in. And then also run various nickel packages because we have enough DBs now to do so. And, I mentioned that our DBs are young, so they may make mistakes and we may get burned at times because we're not going to have a pass rush to help lay the pressure off of our DBs. But, for whatever it's worth, the 2 defensive backs that we drafted were the top 2, top 3, top 5 defensive backs in the whole draft. There was an award that goes out for the top defensive back in college. DeAndre Baker and Julian Love were the finalists. I believe DeAndre Baker won the award, and Julian Love was one of the finalists. So it's not like we have some really, really young guys that just have this raw talent that still needs to be developed. No, these guys are developed and are ready to start day one. I mean, I even read a report a couple of weeks ago. Actually, shortly after Julian Love was drafted, that Julian Love may even play safety. So these DBs can play. Jabril Peppers has been in the league for 2 years, and I think he's eager to show people that he can be the lead safety. And I'm sure he wants to prove Giants fans that we don't need to miss Landon Collins because he's here to help save that secondary. And then Jack Rabbit, I mean, come on. He's always been a stud for the New York Giants. So I think this defense has a lot of potential. And with that said, I have James Bettcher and this New York Giants defense finishing in the top 15. James Bettcher needs to make sure that this defense finishes in the top 15. We have a lot of young defensive linemen, a young core linebacking group, and a young secondary, some studs all over this defense. Do not waste their prime young years on bad defensive output. Get the most performance you can out of these players. James Bettcher, you're on the clock. You need to make sure that this defense performs at a high level this coming season. And now I want to sort of transition into my next segment. I want to talk about how the running back position has changed over the last couple of years and how today's NFL offenses require running backs to not only be great when they're rushing in between tackles and on sweep plays, but also being great receiving backs out of the backfield and even having some of these running backs line up as slot receivers. It's an amazing thing what we're seeing out of these running backs and how gradually NFL offenses become more innovative, look for players that can be used in multiple ways, and the running back is just another example of that. Right? I mean, before running backs just used to be blockers. Then they became runners and blockers. Sometimes you only had running backs that can run in between tackles. Then they look for running backs that can run outside of the tackle on sweep plays. I mean, this running back position has grown so, just very tremendously over the last several years. Now we have running backs that can not only run really well, but that can also catch really well. Some of these running backs, may not necessarily lead their team in receiving, but are definitely in the top 2, top 3 in the receiving category for their team. And in many times, these running backs, because they're dual threat running backs, are the be-all, end-all for their offenses. And I was as I was preparing for this episode, I thought, I was just sort of thinking of all the running backs. Almost half the league has running backs that are starting running backs that can do both things so well. Run and catch the ball. And I'm actually going to name about many running backs. So guys, get ready. Saquon Barkley, New York Giants. Alvin Kamara, New Orleans Saints. Christian McCaffrey, Carolina Panthers. David Johnson, Arizona Cardinals. Le'Veon Bell, New York Jets. Todd Gurley, Los Angeles Rams. Ezekiel Elliott, Dallas Cowboys. And, I just want to stop before I continue to name more running backs. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott has shown when he's not in the lineup, Dak Prescott struggles. That's because Zeke not only was a great runner, but was also great out of the backfield. Dak literally relied on Zeke to give more than half of that Dallas Cowboys offense. James Conner, Pittsburgh Steelers, Kareem Hunt, previously on the Kansas City Chiefs. I think once Kareem Hunt comes off of his suspension, he'll definitely get some start-worthy snaps and share those snaps with Nick Chubb on the Cleveland Browns. Aaron Jones, Green Bay Packers. Tariq Cohen, Chicago Bears. Joe Mixon, Cincinnati Bengals. Jerick McKinnon, San Francisco 49ers. Melvin Gordon, Los Angeles Chargers. Damian Williams, Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, those are 15 running backs. That's almost half the league. And I stopped after that. I stopped after 15. James White, New England Patriots. Granted, James White I'll actually redact that one because James White isn't as good of a runner. He's more used in sort of pass down situations. But I just named so many running backs that are the lead running backs that are not only going to get most of the carries, but also most of the snaps, even on pass downs. It's very, very incredible. I mean, the fact that we see running backs line up as slot receivers at times. I mean, think about it from a matchup perspective, how crazy that is. Right? Because, look, we all know receivers can line up as slot receivers and tight ends can line up in and out of the line of scrimmage. But when a running back does it, running backs are usually one of the more harder positions to bring down. And I'm just going to break this down a little bit more. So, every time a linebacker usually defends a receiver, a tight end, or a running back, that's a mismatch within itself. Because linebackers aren't that fast to defend these fast offensive players. So, we already know that's a mismatch. So, once that running back catches the ball, gets open, and hits second level of that field, do you think those DBs can bring running backs down? DBs know how to tackle wide receivers because DBs and wide receivers are usually around the same size. Maybe not in height, but in frame they are. But these DBs are nowhere near the same frame as these running backs. That's why these running backs are so effective, so dangerous. That's why they're breaking so many all-purpose yards year in and year out. That's why NFL offenses are literally designing to get these running backs open in addition to their carries, in addition to 15 to 20 carries a game. I mean, almost to a fault, because we've seen Pat Shurmur, as I mentioned early on in this podcast, to a fault, where it was so clear that Saquon Barkley was going to get the ball in many of those third down situations. And the more crazier stat to mention, many of these running backs that I just mentioned have greater than 40 receptions in a year. Maybe with the exception of a couple of them due to injuries and just not getting enough snaps yet. But these guys are getting wide receiver-like numbers. Wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 option type of statistics. Which is why, when you think about it from the Le'Veon Bell standpoint, when he was sort of having that contract negotiation with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Le'Veon Bell was thinking, hey, I'm not your typical running back. I'm also one of your best wide receivers on this team. Yeah, you have Antonio Brown, but you're also relying on me to run routes. I'm literally giving you more than half of the offensive production on this team. That's why I want to get more money than what the market is offering the best running back. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. All these running backs can do both of these things so well. And, it sort of reminds me, I feel like this is just another situation, similarly to how the New England Patriots sort of revamped the tight end position, making the tight end one of the more important receiving options in NFL offenses today. I feel like they've made the receiving back one of the more important pieces in the running back group. They had that with James White. They had that with Shane Vereen. Those two running backs were so effective, so dominant in the pass game. I mean, even to a standpoint where they would get these first downs, these gut-wrenching first downs late in games to close out games and late drives. I mean, the New England Patriots literally are sort of always reinventing the wheel, always finding new ways to get players involved in different ways, to attack defenses in different angles, different perspectives. And the NFL is always behind the New England Patriots. And look, I'm a New York Giants fan. As you guys know, I hate the New England Patriots. But I got to give credit when it's due. Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots are always reinventing the wheel. And that's another aspect that they've reinvented in NFL offenses. The dual threat running back. The running back that can also catch the ball out of the backfield from screen plays and even lining up as a receiver. It's just some pretty impressive stuff to see. It's pretty impressive stuff to watch. And think about it. These running backs that I just named are running backs that are probably, are the top running backs in everyone's board from a fantasy football perspective. Because these guys are going to get you 50 to 60 catches a year. These running backs are also going to be relied upon to pick up the slack for other receivers and tight ends that don't end up having the greatest games from a fantasy football perspective. I mean, that's what Christian McCaffrey did for me last year. There were times where my wide receiver 2, my flex wide receiver, wasn't getting enough receptions. Maybe he didn't get enough targets, but the running back, Christian McCaffrey, was always getting the targets. Him and Saquon Barkley had, 70, 80 receptions? I mean, Alvin Kamara was killing it from a receiving standpoint, even when Mark Ingram was the second running back on that team. And now that Alvin Kamara is going to be the clear number 1 running back on that Saints team, I mean, I know the Saints signed Latavius Murray, but look, man, I think they know that Alvin Kamara is going to be that lead back. I don't think Latavius Murray is going to threaten Alvin Kamara's statistics from a receiving standpoint. And then when I just think about which running back sort of really, pioneered this over the last couple of years, which was the one running back, while the New England Patriots did pioneer this from a game plan and NFL offense standpoint, when I think about which running back mastered the dual threat running back over the last several years, it's got to be David Johnson, running back from the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, this was the first running back that I think everyone saw from a fantasy football perspective. This is the guy that can get you statistics on both aspects of an offense, rushing and receiving. Because think about this, right? Even from a standard perspective, you're getting points from his receiving yards and his rushing yards. You have the potential to get points from his receiving touchdowns in addition to his rushing touchdowns. And then from a PPR, I mean, he just becomes a PPR monster because he's going to get his targets, he's going to get his receptions, he's going to get his receiving yards, and then again, he's going to get his receiving touchdowns in addition to his rushing stats. Running backs like David Johnson have not only been beneficial to fantasy owners like myself, but they've also been beneficial to quarterbacks. Rookie quarterbacks or quarterbacks entering into a new offensive system. They take the pressure off of quarterbacks to not have to always throw the ball down the field, to rely on a running back to get them a 5, 6, 7, or even a 10-yard reception. Get them that first down. Takes the pressure off of offensive coordinators when it gets closer to the goal line. You're 1st and 5 or you're 1st and goal, 2nd and goal, 3rd and goal. And you see that your running plays aren't working because they're clogging up the lane. So what do? You have the running back run out of the backfield, find the running back wide open, literally can walk into the end zone sometimes. How many times have we seen that? Where a quarterback just has to turn around, flick the ball over to the running back, and he's literally walking to the end zone. Because the defense didn't foresee that there was going to be a pass play to the running back. This running back position has been, definitely revolutionized to the point where even if you're a team heading into the NFL draft, that is something that you want to consider. Can this running back do more than just be a great runner? Can this running back be a dual threat running back? Is this running back worth picking so high? I think that's why it was worth picking Saquon last year with the number 2 overall pick. Because the New York Giants knew they were getting more than just a running back. They were getting a pure athlete, a pure NFL football player that not only can run the ball well, but can also receive the ball well, catch the ball well, and then when he's in space, create havoc, make people miss. He's a mismatch for linebackers, and when he's in space, he's hard to bring down by those DBs. And so are the other running backs that I named earlier on in this segment. The running back position has changed, and NFL offenses are making sure that that's a priority, that they can grab a running back that can accomplish that. Dominate in the run game and dominate in the pass game. And if they don't, If they're not able to find the one running back that can do that, they make sure that they can have two types of running backs. Running backs that can run the ball, and then running backs that they can bring in on pass downs. The Philadelphia Eagles do that. The Indianapolis Colts can do that. The New England Patriots have done that. The Miami Dolphins have done that. I mean, many of these teams can understand that every running back coming out of college can't do both. So they make sure that they can draft running backs that can do either or, so that they can create and mix up packages as they're going through their sort of possessions, as they're going through the downs. So if it's a running down, they'll bring in that running back that can be a pure runner. When it's pass situations, they'll bring in that running back that is great at route running and great coming out of the backfield and catching that ball and getting extra yards for that first down. And guys, that's about it for episode 10 of the Unsportsmanlike Conduct podcast. Thanks for tuning in. It's always a pleasure. Please, again, make sure you follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. I'm also on Twitter now, so please follow me on Twitter. That's _unsportsman. And lastly, you finished this episode, so you might as well subscribe. Please subscribe to my YouTube page. It's always a pleasure. Thanks. Peace out. It's your boy, HP.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.